Hello and welcome back to Doing Death with your host Jan. In today's podcast we're going to look at the amazing ways that world tradition and culture have impacted how we honour and celebrate death. Death has always been celebrated and commemorated in significant ways. Archaeologists' research uncovered evidence which showed that humans have buried their dead with ritual and ceremony as far back as 60,000 BCE, and even buried their dead with flowers, which is similar to the practices we have today. A lot of our death rituals were carried out as a sign of respect to the deceased. However, many of our rituals are also rooted in fear and were practiced to protect the living. In the modern West, firing guns, ringing bells and making the sign of the cross at a funeral all have their roots in religious superstition and were done to scare off evil spirits. Singing and chanting at the graveside were also done to ward off evil spirits, but also to protect and bid the person a fond farewell as they crossed over to the other side. The custom of shutting or sealing the eyes of the deceased is believed to sever the connection between the world of the living and the spirit world. Covering the face of the dead with a sheet comes from the pagan beliefs that the spirit of the deceased could not escape through the mouth. Some Native American cultures, such as the Navajo, went as far as to burn the home and possessions of the deceased to keep them from returning. In Denmark and Ireland, all the windows were opened and doors unlocked to ensure that the soul was able to escape. In Victorian times, mirrors were covered, clocks were stopped at the time of death, and family photos were turned face down to prevent close relatives being possessed by the spirit of the dead. The dead were also carried out of the house feet first to stop the spirit of the person looking back into the house, and so that they couldn't see where they were going and wouldn't be able to return. And to this day, funeral directors still carry the deceased feet first. Some cultures took their fears of spirits to an extreme. The Saxons of early England are reported to have cut the feet off their dead, so the spirit of the deceased would be unable to walk back into the house. Some Aboriginal tribes took the even more unusual step of removing the head of the deceased, believing this would leave the spirit too busy searching for his head to worry about the living. All over the globe for centuries, we feared the dead while somehow managing to revere the life of the departed. These strange and elaborate traditions have, in the main, been influenced by culture, tradition, and in recent centuries, religious practices. We'll take a look at a few examples now. In the continent of Africa, in places such as Ghana and Nigeria in the West, the dead are often given elaborate funerals where a decorative casket is used to illustrate the status or profession of the deceased. It's customary to bury and not cremate. Funerals are usually enormous affairs. Those attending will wear black or red. Casual clothing should not be worn to a Nigerian funeral, and members of the same families may wear a similar colour. In southern Africa, for example, in Botswana and Namibia, funerals involve entire communities who will gather over the days leading up to the funeral to pray and sing. An African funeral serves to draw attention to the permanent separation of the living and the dead, and the spiritual journey of the deceased in becoming an ancestor after life. For this purpose, special efforts are made to avoid offence to the dead. African funeral rites and rituals have evolved through the blending of traditional practices such as Christianity and Islam, with over 50% of the population practicing these religions respectively. In India, 80% of people practice the Hindu faith. The soul is believed to go on according to one's karma, and it's preferable to die at home surrounded by family. The deceased is cremated usually within 24 hours to liberate the soul quickly, and the ashes are scattered over water, the most desirable place being the Ganges. And some Hindu families living outside of India will make the special pilgrimage to do this, or if they are in the UK, will seek permission to scatter the ashes on a river or at sea. Chinese death tradition holds that an elderly family member should die at home. At the time of death, all the mirrors in the house are removed so as not to add more sorrow to the family from a reflection of the casket. A candle is lit, which burns as family members pray over the body. The body is dressed in a favourite outfit, and the children, spouse and daughters-in-law of the deceased wear black. Funeral rituals tend to be elaborate and vary in complexity according to the age and status of the deceased. During the funeral procession, family members wear coloured cloth on their sleeves. The Chinese practice great respect and reverence for the elders and even more for ancestors, which is similar to the West African tradition. Around 60% of China's population is strictly atheist, and roughly 10% of the population believe in the teachings of Buddha. Death customs in the Jewish tradition consider death impure, and the dead must be separated by a distance from places of human habitation and buried very soon after death, if not on the same day. Once death has been established, Jewish traditions consider the dead defenceless, and as a sign of respect, a body should not be left alone, but should be constantly watched over until the funeral. There are 3 major stages to preparing the body for burial: washing, ritual purification, and dressing. The body is wrapped in a simple cloth shroud or robe. Commonly, the casket is a plain wooden box without external adornment. The funeral itself is symbolic as a farewell to the dead, and it's simple and brief in nature. In many traditional funerals, the casket will be carried from the hearse to the grave in 7 stages, with a symbolic pause after each stage. The end of the funeral signifies a transition of mourning for the immediate family. Condolences are now expressed by the rabbi and others in the mourning party. We've come a long way in the UK in terms of funeral traditions, from the pre-Christian Celts who believed in reincarnation to our modern-day scientific knowledge of the process of death. Many elements of UK funerals have become unfashionable due to a shift in our superstitious customs, stopping the clocks, covering mirrors and turning photos down. And as an individual who was born in the UK and hails from a Jamaican heritage, I'm familiar with the tradition of Nine Night. The Jamaican ritual of the Nine Night is carried out to honour the memory of the deceased and has its roots in West African culture. The origin of the Nine Night is to recognise the spirit or duppy leaving the deceased 9 days after the person has died. And once the spirit leaves the body, the soul of the loved one can return unharmed and unhindered as an ancestor to their ancestral homeland, Africa. The Nine Night in the UK can be more of a festive event, and many people attend the home of the deceased or a separate venue in honour of the deceased. A Nine Night is a kind of equivalent to what we know as a wake in the UK, but it takes place before the funeral, and a wake will take place afterwards. A Nine Night can be held in the family home or at a local reception, just as a wake can. And just like a wake, the Nine Night is an opportunity to share memories and celebrate the life of the person who's passed. The tradition of the wake dates back to Christianity and used to be the period before a burial, when family and friends would keep a vigil to ensure the body was kept safe from evil spirits. This night-long activity was then known as waking the corpse. Death is marked in so many diverse and wonderful ways all over the globe, and having some insight into the different cultures and rituals can be helpful, especially in the UK, as we live in a cross-cultural environment. As a funeral professional working in a multicultural location, I've definitely noticed more and more families blending the traditional UK funeral customs with their own cultural rituals. So it's likely that the traditions of funerals will continue to change and evolve and become more and more tailored, resulting in further ways to honour and celebrate death and give more of a personal tribute to the person who's passed away. I've spoken about funeral customs and traditions in this podcast, but it's important to mention that this is such a huge subject with a rich history, the extent of which will not be covered in this podcast. Death is indeed a universal experience. It unites us no matter where we're from or what our cultural religions are. These funeral traditions have shown really that from the beginning of time we've found a way to cope with our superstitions and fears about death and dying. We found ways to care for our dead and say goodbye. and ways to commemorate the life of our loved ones. I've had such a good time researching this project and sharing some of my knowledge with you. I hope you've enjoyed the show as well. I've listed some web sources below, so take a look. And if you've got any questions, do either visit our YouTube channel or email doingdeathwithjan@outlook.com. Remember, to contemplate our mortality is the ultimate reflection, not on death and dying, but on life itself. Thanks for listening, and until next time, be blessed and live well.